Well, good afternoon, America. This is Stuart Ryan, the Ryan Report, and today's subject is the value of art and free speech in a new fascist state, ours. And no, I'm not going to talk about Trump regime's proposal to tariff movies made abroad or partially abroad. That's for another day. Nor will I address our dilemma of having a fascist Supreme Court that has led us into this multi headed form of totalitarianism. There are, after all, a number of monuments in the arts to critical thinking on American democracy. And recently, in my idiosyncratic state of mind, I recall two of them that have surfaced into this time of trouble and turmoil. One being by blacklisted writer Howard Fast, and the other an extraordinary motion picture starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, directed by George Cukor. First, Freedom Road by Howard Fast was published in 1944, long before most U.S. historians recognized how Southern historians had distorted the country's view of Reconstruction and will probably get purged from library shelves soon enough if Trump and Trumpists get their way. Is basically a historical novel set in the Reconstruction era after the Civil War in South Carolina. It centers on Gideon Jackson, a former slave who becomes a leader in the community of Caldwell, where black and poor white people unite to build a democratic society. Gideon advocates for education, civil rights, and economic independence, leading his community to purchase the Caldwell plantation and established an integrated school. However, their progress is challenged and stopped by the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and the resistance of wealthy planters who seek to undermine the gains of Reconstruction, restoring the old fascist order. Now, Fast is an interesting character, and in 1950, he was called before the House Committee of Un-American Activities Committee, run by Joseph McCarthy. And in his testimony, he had the balls to refuse to disclose the names of contributors to a fund for a home for orphans of American veterans of the Spanish Civil War. And one of those contributors was Eleanor Roosevelt. And please note that the director, Elia Kazan, by contrast, when he was called before the committee, betrayed many others, including his friends, to save his own career, and this included my own teacher, the Venerable Paul Mann. Simultaneously, I believe it was 1944 when it got released, there was a brilliant motion picture for its time released dealing with fascism and wealth in America titled Keeper of the Flame, which starred Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and it was directed by the Venerable George Cukor. And as one reviewer put it, and I'd rather use his review than my own description of the film, this is much more explicit. A reviewer, Richard D., wrote, during the era in which this movie was made, there was a significant number of fascist movements in addition to those that had taken over governments in Europe and Japan. In the United States, one of the most publicized was the Silver Legion, led by William Dudley Pelley. In Britain, there was Sir Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists, funded by a Dutch oil magnate and supported by press baron Lord Rothermere and Arnold Leachy's Imperial Fascist League. These movements appealed to disaffected people who could be led to believe that the prevailing, especially during the Great Depression, democratic economic and political order was unsatisfactory and should be replaced by a new world order, a corporate state headed by a dictator, personified by such leaders as Pelley, Mosley, and others. However, the fascist leaders used deceit and the freedom of speech permitted in democracies to fool their followers into believing that democratic government is fundamentally flawed and needs to be replaced. So, a tribute to both Howard Fast, Freedom Road, and Keeper of the Flame, a wonderful movie. You should all see it. And that ends our discussion. Just a couple of books and a motion picture that are the very best of us.